From his dominant performance to ship the NBA's best team out of the playoffs, to whether his playoff heroics can land him a ring, here are the real reasons why playoff Jimmy Butler is built different. I mean, can anyone question that after what he did in the first round this season? 37.6 points, 6 rebounds, and 4.8 assists, all against the Milwaukee Bucks, the team that was being universally backed to win the NBA. If that doesn't turn you into a Jimmy Butler fanboy, nothing ever will. This is an even bigger surprise when you look at some of his numbers from the regular season. I'll get to it in more detail later in the video, but let's just say Jimmy Butler wasn't exactly Jimmy Buckets earlier in the campaign. And this was a very welcome change, as the 33-year-old decided to take his game to the next level and become a different player altogether. The Bucks couldn't handle the smoke. It was pure destruction and a complete performance. He wasn't only scoring freely, but also coming up with big stoppages on the defensive end. The Milwaukee fans are coping by saying that with Giannis Antetokounmpo fit for the entire series, they would have won. But don't make the mistake of complaining about injuries and bad luck in the playoffs to Butler. Few players have suffered more than he has due to poor luck and injuries in the postseason. As far as the Heat superstar was concerned, he took on a strong Bucks team and destroyed them within 5 games as the 8th seed. Staggering. Absolutely staggering. And when you compare this to how he was playing in the regular season, you realize that playoff Butler is actually a true phenomenon. The Heat have been one of the biggest underachievers this season. They just couldn't put together a consistent run of results. This was the major reason they finished 8th in the regular season. And after losing their first game in the play-in tournament to the Atlanta Hawks, Miami scraped through after defeating the Chicago Bulls. They weren't given a chance by any bookie or analyst, and I don't blame them, folks. Butler and Miami were not supposed to do what they did, especially not based on how they'd managed to make the postseason with a 44-38 record. But when the lights shine bright, you turn to your superstars, and if you have someone like Butler in your ranks, you don't need to worry about much. This man was averaging 23 points and 6 rebounds during the regular season. Good numbers, and not at all mediocre by any stretch of the imagination. But then, Game 1 rolled in against the Bucks, and playing 43 minutes, Butler dropped 35 points along with 11 dimes. It was a stunning performance, but many thought that due to Giannis's absence, the Bucks struggled, and that they'll make a comeback soon. On to Game 2 in Milwaukee again. This time, Jimmy struggled due to some health concerns and could only play for 28 minutes, but he made them count, dropping 25 points in the Heat's only loss during the series. As the series took center stage in Miami for Games 3 and 4, the world was treated to the best Jimmy Buckets impression you're ever going to see. In Game 3, Butler only played 28 minutes, but came up with a game-high 30 points. In what could be considered a blowout win, considering the Heat ran out 121-99 winners, restricting the Bucks to under 100 points. But that still wasn't the most impressive display from him throughout the series. It's like he was keeping track of what people were saying about him, that the Heat and Jimmy B were lucky that Giannis was out. So, he waited. And with Giannis returning for Game 4, he saved his best for that must-win game for both teams. If the Bucks had closed out the game with a win, considering they had a double-figure lead in the second half in Game 4, the series would have been perfectly in the balance ahead of the last 3 games. But these are the moments Butler lives for, you know? And he dropped a 56-point performance with 9 rebounds and a huge block. I mean, the man was shooting at 68% from the field. Unreal! And he still made 83% of his free throws. Honestly, he could have ended the night with well over 60 points. But for good measure, Butler closed out the series immediately in Game 5 in Milwaukee. Yes, to answer your question, Giannis was playing that game too. Butler scored that phenomenal game-tying shot in regulation before going out to send the Bucks out in overtime with a 42-point performance. That said, the craziest part about all this is how it wasn't the first time we were treated to playoff Jimmy, or even the first time the Bucks were tormented by this outrageous version of the Butler. And there's something about how whenever he and his team aren't given a chance, the 33-year-old plans to defy the odds. For instance, here's a mind-blowing statistic. Since his debut in the NBA, Jimmy's been a part of 13 series where his team was considered the lower seed. Out of all those series, his team has come out on top a total of 6 times, an unbelievable 46% win rate. Since 2014, when he made his debut, lower seeds have a series record of 33-102, which comes out to around 24%. So if you have Jimmy in a lower-seeded team, you nearly double your chances of winning, which is truly absurd. In fact, the Heat of 2020 became the only 5th seed in the 21st century to make the finals. What's even crazier? This is how the Heat became the first play-in team to win a playoff series this season. And while the Lakers also beat the Grizzlies in Game 6, the Heat deserve extra credit for knocking out the favorite for the NBA championship this season. At the same time, as good as Butler-led teams are in the playoffs, his individual performances deserve all the credit. Like, before he destroyed the Bucks this season, Jimmy had already done something similar to the Boston Celtics last season. Sure, the Heat had the home court advantage in that series and finished top of the pile in the East, but coming into the series, the Heat were massive underdogs. They had nearly half of their roster out-injured. That included important players like Tyler Hero, Kyle Lowry, Max Struss, PJ Tucker, and Gabe Vincent. Even Butler himself missed the end of Game 3. But when he did play, he was unstoppable. A 47-point performance helped Miami win Game 6 in Boston, and he nearly stole Game 7 with a fantastic 35-point show. Again, this was just how he played throughout the postseason. His stat line from last season's playoffs was 27.5 points, 7.5 rebounds, 4.6 assists, and 2 steals per contest. Compare that to his stats from the regular season, and there's a huge difference. Less than 22 points per game, under 6 rebounds, and under 2 steals. He can deny it all he likes, but playoff Jimmy is definitely real and truly spectacular, like the time he nearly upset them 5 years earlier with a 2-0 lead over Boston, again as a number 8 seed. Absurd. He couldn't complete the upset on that occasion, but he's done it against the Bucks, and that's just as impressive. So has there been someone like him in history? Can you compare Butler's playoff madness to someone else in NBA history? This is a tough question. Some folks may compare him to the likes of Charles Barkley, John Stockton, and Patrick Ewing, the legendary players who couldn't win a ring despite some world-class performances in the postseason. But a faction of fans disagree with this particular comparison. Instead, they believe he's this legendary underdog, someone who's developed a playoff identity that's very much his own. Jimmy Butler is a unique player who likes to deprive other superstars of championships, even though he's never won one himself. And there's something beautiful in how this is similar to his path to NBA stardom. A lowly recruit out of college, Butler was the final pick of the first round, and it wouldn't be wrong to suggest that he embraced that underdog tag. From his draft class, Butler's at least in the top 4 or 5 of the best players. And, except for Kawhi Leonard, no one has a better playoff record than this beast. So ultimately, you've got to ask, will Jimmy be remembered as this legendary underdog, or will he win a championship? For the 6-time All-Star, the stars would need to align perfectly for that ring he's been chasing for a decade and more. It could very well happen this year, but he's already suffered an injury in the second round against the Knicks. However, if the Heat come through unscathed, they can rely on Butler's playoff prowess to launch another attack on one of the remaining big boys in the East. Because if they beat New York, they'll either have to battle MVP favorite Joel Embiid's Philadelphia 76ers or last year's finalists, the Boston Celtics. The interesting thing is, either of the two teams doesn't look solid enough to sweep the series, and given what's happened to the mighty Milwaukee Bucks in 2023, it's impossible to write off any playoff team that has Jimmy Butler on their roster. So, from single-handedly leading the Heat since he came to Miami in 2019, to his dominant performance to knock the Eastern Conference favorites out of the playoffs, these were the real reasons why playoff Jimmy Butler is built different.